Hi everyone, Dr. Eric Kaufman here, and in this tutorial we're going to look at how we can avoid scams in general. So first we'll look at the different types of import and export scams, red flags that tell you that you're about to engage with a scammer. We're going to look at the MIT import and export tool and how we can use it to avoid scammers, and finally how we can protect ourselves. Let's get started. So what are the different types of import and export scams? Here are some of the common ones. One is the fees scam. So a buyer or even a seller will have you pay some sort of fee, whether it's an inspection fee or a shipping fee or any kind of fee before any agreements or any contracts are signed or any deals have been actually made. They just request a particular fee, such as a $300 or $500 holding fee, and once they receive that fee, they will disappear. Next is paying in advance. So another type of import and export scam is that a supplier will insist on taking payment in advance, whether part of it or all of it, and once they receive the payment, you will not receive a product. For this reason, it's best to just deal with buyers who are paying by letter of credit, LC, and suppliers who are dealing with the same thing, letter of credit. Although there is more paperwork involved, it is a much more reliable method for taking and receiving payments. Another important aspect for avoiding this type of scam is to perform a good background check. Next is fake documents. So a supplier, for example, may present a fake bill of lading to receive part of their payment in advance. This document can be forged and look very realistic. And finally, a fake buyer. This is an unusual phenomenon that I've run into many times, especially from the country of Israel, where a buyer will say that they are looking for a particular quantity of a product. And then once they receive a price quote from you, they reverse it on you and say that they'll supply you for half the price. I've never indulged these fake buyers before, and so I'm sure that they lead to a scam, but I'm not sure exactly how they will lead to a scam. Most likely through fees or arranging fake deals. Let's move on. So what are the red flags that have me avoid a company when I'm doing a background check? The first one is that there's no company website. If there's no company website, I simply don't do business with the buyer or the supplier, and I just avoid them altogether. No company email. So if their email is at gmail.com or at yahoo.com instead of at their company name.com, then I will entirely avoid them. These are all red flags that, from my experience and the experience of others, are best to just entirely avoid for the sake of avoiding scams. So next is if they fail a background check in any one aspect. If you've done a full background check, and you can see how we performed that in the previous video, if they fail in any one aspect but shine in all the rest, it's best to avoid them because they are very likely just scammers. If they are in a hurry to complete a deal and rush you and tell you that the deal needs to be completed soon, then it's best to avoid them as they are likely scammers. If they're ordering unusually large quantities of a commodity, so if they're ordering several hundreds or thousands of tons of any kind of commodity, whether it's sugar, wheat, or energy, then it is best to avoid them as they are probably scammers. And I say sugar, wheat, and energy because these are the places where I've most commonly found scams. Sugar is especially a rampant one, especially in the form of a Middle Eastern buyer looking to buy sugar. Wheat is another common one. Energy, such as jet fuel especially, and even scrap metals. Avoid anybody who communicates with you using generic "I want to buy your product" messages. Instead of stating exactly what it is that they want to buy, they will simply say, "I want to buy your product," and just avoid these. Countries known for scams, such as Nigeria, China, and as we spoke about, Israel, it's best to just avoid companies that do business in these regions. However, you can pursue them, especially with the likes of China or somewhere a little more legitimate like Israel, but you have to be very wary, very paranoid, and make sure you do a very good background check, and it's best possibly to pay for that background check as well as your own background check to make sure that everything is secure. On Alibaba.com, when you receive a message, you are informed of the buyer's country, but also of the IP address or internet address that the message comes from. So, for example, a company might claim to be American, however, their message came from a computer in Nigeria. So if there's a difference between the country's IP address, the message's IP address or internet address, if it's different from the buyer's claimed address, it's best to just avoid them entirely. Look at their business type. If they're a trading company or an agency or a broker, it's best to just avoid them for two reasons. One is there are a lot of scams amongst companies that claim to be these types of companies, and you don't want to do business with another broker or agent because it complicates the paperwork very much, even if they are legitimate. Finally, if there are any special fees that are not common in the import and export business, just avoid them. Most importantly, trust your gut. If it feels wrong, avoid it. So next is the MIT Import and Export Tool. This is the MIT Economic Atlas, and it allows you to view imports and exports of many different countries and sort them by import, export, product, category, country, and many more. So for example, if you have a buyer that's looking to buy 10,000 or 100,000 tons of sugar, you can simply put that country into the search bar and choose sugar as the product and see how much sugar they are importing. And then ask yourself, how likely is it that a small company you've never heard of is buying 10% of a country's total sugar imports? So for example, if you do the math and the buyer wants to buy $20 million worth of sugar and the country as a whole imports $200 million worth of sugar, how likely is it that this guy's small company that you've never heard of, that hasn't turned up much information on a background check, is actually buying 10% of that country's total sugar imports? That's a red flag, and it should be avoided immediately. Next, we'll look at protecting yourself. Many companies provide insurance against imports and exports, even to brokers such as yourself, to ensure that you get paid even in the case of a scam or your goods are destroyed. So generally, they'll perform a background check and then charge you a fee to insure against import and export fraud. So for example, up here in Canada, Export Development Canada provides insurance services to importers and exporters. Finally, as a broker earning a commission from the supplying company, you are generally safe from all these types of scams, since all the transactions and business are performed between the supplier and the buyer themselves, and your role was limited to just introducing them. So as a broker, your chance of becoming victim of a scam are much lower than if you were a supplier or a buyer or a distributor. Generally, you want to be aware of all these scam types, but it is unlikely that they will be able to ruin your business, since you are introducing the supplier to the buyer directly, and they can perform their own background checks on each other, and they do all the business between themselves and simply pay you a commission. However, if you introduce a buyer or a seller to a scammer accidentally, you can forget about ever doing business with them again and risk the chance of developing a bad reputation in your industry. So if you introduce a buyer or a seller to a scammer, even if it's accidental, you're probably never going to be able to do business with that company again because they don't want the risk of being introduced to another scammer. And you also have the chance of developing a bad reputation amongst companies and amongst the industry that you're trading in. So it's best to do a very thorough background check and be very wary of scams. Thank you.